You.
Awesome. So just quickly, I'm recording on my end and just keep an eye on that chat box for timing and you're all set to go.
Perfect. And I think you got it on your end. I'm good. Hello, Natasha. How are you?
Hey, I'm well. How are you doing?
I am fantastic. And I just have to tell you, I love this film. I loved everything you did about it. I may go into a little slightly spoilery territory here because I have so many notes.
Oh my gosh.
But I have to talk about this because I love the fact that you took a character that everyone seems to assume is this prototype for the heroic. And as is obvious, I am a huge vampire nerd, and I have known Dracula since I was 4 or 5 years old, Van
Mhm.
Helsing as well. And I never liked Van Helsing. And the reason
He's kind of a
was,
party pooper.
yeah, I never liked Van Helsing because I'm a Dracula girl, but he always came off in some of these films as very sadistic.
Mhm.
And especially the Dan Curtis Dracula version, which to me he just seemed to be really
He's
enjoying what he
enjoying
was
it too
doing.
much. Yeah.
And I wondered what fed your take into that with this story, what Joe did as well, and you just expanded on it beautifully.
Yeah, well, Joe grounded him. So in the short story, I think there's almost more attention paid to Abraham's, I'm just going to call him Abraham because that's what we called him during production. Abe, to Abraham's role and status as a physician. And so I thought that was really interesting because we never really think about him as a doctor, but he
Yeah.
is. And Dracula itself, as you know, has so much of this sort of meta physician work happening in it, right? The blood transfusions, the diagnosis that's sort of pulled out of Abraham's butt. Um, all of this is actually when you just turn it 2 degrees to the left and start to ground him in his role as a doctor, I think starts to take on a really interesting quality. And so, I'm also myself from a medical family. I grew up, my father's an ER physician. And so I was really fascinated by that idea of like what happens when this medical doctor starts to sort of go off the path a little bit into veering into this metaphysics, into supernatural, into sort of exploring his own vision of the undead and what science cannot necessarily reach. That to me was very exciting and I think sheds a lot of light on Bram Stoker's Dracula. So when you go back and read it with that view, it takes on this entirely new context, which for me was very, very exciting. And so it really started with Joe's story, grounding him not only as a father, but as a doctor and as a physician. And so taking it from there was really the starting point. Then it was all fun from there.
Well, and one thing that I loved about this was I'm just as the story progresses and you see the levels of who really is the villain.
Yeah.
And you're seeing it, I was filling in the blanks in my head with, okay, well, this is very Jack the Ripper.
Yeah.
Like the images, because it's not really spoiler because it's implied very heavily in the short story as well, that he's got this collection of the photographs, and I really liked. It clicked after when the scene where he's fixing the railroad worker, that,
Mhm.
oh, look, I'm taking another picture because I just impaled somebody.
Mhm.
And even though they lived and I fixed it, and it seemed like he was rusty when it came to the doctoring. And but I really loved that aspect. I was curious how much background you gave him in your own head as you were writing this and
Yeah,
filling in that.
we worked on it quite a bit. Titus Welliver, who plays Abraham, and I talked quite a bit. And I gave Titus a document that does expand out on Abraham's background quite a bit. So I did sort of take the liberty to give Abraham more of a biography than necessarily we get out of the original source text. For me, it was very important that Abraham is a working class guy in opposition to the rest of the characters from Dracula, who are all sort of high society folks. So he is this sort of working class guy who pulled himself from the working class to this status as physician. And I think we have to remember as well, at the time, doctors were not necessarily highly regarded in society. They were still very working class guys. They were working with blood and, nasty stuff. Yeah, so I think that that class aspect was something that I was personally very interested in, and that he saw himself as this guy, he says, I know what the feeling of hot blood in my hands feels like. That monologue was very important to me and to Titus as well, because it gives us just a little hint into how Abraham feels about everything, how Abraham feels like he pulled himself up by his bootstraps, right? He's got that mythology that he's built about himself in his own head. And that sort of seed of like, I know best, I'm capable, I am God, I can save lives, I can destroy lives, is what, of course, blossoms into what we see him in 1915 in the movie.
Well, I got time for one more question, and this is one I definitely had to ask about it because as I was watching this, and I really love the subtlety and how you did it, all of the victims are women.
Yeah.
And that scene in particular with Arthur coming back and asking, did we did I kill her? And it's like you're creating a cult. You're
Yeah.
creating your own minions, and it all just perfectly meshes at the end with what he's doing with his the sons come
Yeah.
together and do
Yeah.
exactly what he wanted.
Yeah.
And it just was perfect. And I just was curious about that aspect of it where you've turned Abraham into basically the ideal of that time of history where women were second class citizens, men were the ones that were in charge, and you got to wonder what led to Lucy and Mina if there even was a Dracula.
Yeah, I mean, that's the question that I'd like everybody to answer for themselves. But I think, you said earlier that it is very Jack the Ripper coded. That's absolutely intentional. We pulled quite a bit, even in his costume and the way he presents. That's all very intentional. And yeah, it was important to me that women primarily be his victims, because that is what happens in Dracula. And, Dracula's victims as well. Dracula is also drawn to women. So, I think there is something sort of interesting in that they are victimized in our reality and also in our mythology, right? So in our horror pieces, we see these women, mostly working class women, who are more vulnerable, who fall victim to these characters, right? And to answer the Dracula piece, I'll leave you with Jocelyn Donahue, who plays Mina, and I had because she asked this question, of course, and what I basically said to her is Mina did have an experience, and it was a traumatic experience, and it's something she has been struggling with since that time in her life. And whatever that experience was, drove her to Abraham's arms, drove her to be a part of Abraham's cult. So I leave that to you, what that experience was.
I have theories, but I don't have time to ask you about it. But I
Great. I
do.
love
As
that.
I said, I have a giant list. I'm like, oh my God.
I
But
love
thank you so much
that.
for this because I love, as much as I say I hate Van Helsing, I actually love the character and I love that whole aspect. And anytime people don't give enough attention to him, and
Mhm.
it's interesting to see what you've done with him and how the spin that you've put on him.
Yeah.
So fantastic. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you so much. I
Thank
appreciate
you.
that.
No worries. Bye bye.
Jessica.
Bye.
Thank you.